You wake up in the middle of the night with your heart racing. She is sitting on the edge of the bed, just staring at you in the dark. She says nothing. Just that heavy silence you've already learned to fear more than any scream. You know you did something wrong, but you don't know what. And worst of all, you're already apologizing before you even understand why. This is the moment when you realize that something is completely wrong, but you can't name what it is. Welcome to a relationship with a toxic and narcissistic woman. There is a type of relationship that doesn't destroy you with explicit violence. There are no physical assaults, no constant screaming, no obvious cheating. In fact, in the eyes of everyone around you, you look like the perfect couple. She is successful, intelligent, admired. You should feel lucky. And in the beginning, you really did. But something changed. And that change was so gradual, so subtle, that you can't point to exactly when everything started to fall apart. What no one tells you is that there are women who turn relationships into hierarchies disguised as love. They don't dominate with force, they dominate with constant evaluation. Every gesture of yours is measured, every word is weighed, every action is judged. And the criteria for that evaluation change every day. What was enough yesterday is mediocre today. What she praised last week is now a reason for silent disappointment. Let's be direct, you are trapped in a destructive psychological dynamic, and the scariest part is that you probably haven't realized it yet. Because toxic relationships with narcissistic women don't start with obvious red flags. They start with you feeling chosen, special, lucky. She could be with anyone, but she chose you. This creates an invisible emotional debt that you will spend years trying to pay. In the beginning, everything seems too perfect to be true. And it was. She admired you, valued you, made you feel like you were the best version of yourself. But this wasn't genuine love, it was strategic investment. She was creating an idealized version of you in her mind, not to accept you, but to establish an impossible standard you would never be able to maintain. The first phase of this dynamic is idealization. She puts you on a pedestal so high that you don't even realize pedestals are precarious platforms. You feel valued, desired, important. She talks about you as if you were meant to be together. Introduces you to her friends with pride. Naturally includes you in her future plans. You feel safe. And it is exactly this initial sense of safety that will make the later fall so devastating. But then something changes. It's not an abrupt change, it's a subtle shift in the tone of conversations. The sentences that used to be compliments now come with small caveats. You're amazing, but I love you, however. You do so much for me, I just think you could. These caveats are the beginning of constant evaluation. You're not being directly criticized yet, you're being shaped. And you accept this shaping because it comes wrapped in the language of personal growth. I just want you to be the best version of yourself. I'm helping you evolve. Mature relationships require us to challenge each other. Everything sounds reasonable. After all, who doesn't want to improve? Who doesn't want to be the best version of themselves for the person they love? The problem is that these demands for improvement never have an end point. There is no moment when you reach the standard and can finally relax. Because the standard is mobile. It exists to keep you in a constant state of trying. You're never supposed to feel comfortable, never supposed to feel sufficient, never supposed to stop trying to prove your value. Here is something you need to understand right now. In healthy relationships, love is not something you earn daily through performance. Love is not a performance evaluation where you lose points if you don't reply to a message within 5 minutes. Love is not a contract where you have to meet invisible clauses to avoid emotional penalties. But in relationships with narcissistic women, that is exactly how it works. And the cruelest part is that you will start to believe this is normal. You will start to think that all relationships work this way, that you are the immature one for wanting emotional stability, that you are selfish for asking for predictability in her affection. The transition from idealization to constant evaluation happens through a psychological mechanism called intermittent reinforcement. She doesn't criticize you all the time. If she did, you would leave. She alternates between moments of genuine warmth and punitive coldness. You never know which version of her you will find when you get home. This unpredictability keeps you alert, anxious, always trying to figure out what to do to guarantee her warm version. And this is where your identity begins to crack. Because you stop acting based on what you want, what you believe, what you feel. You start acting based on what will generate the least problematic reaction in her. Your choices stop being yours and become calculations of her emotional management. You start abandoning things. Not in a dramatic way, but gradually. A hobby here, a friend there. You rationalize, it's not a big deal, relationships require sacrifices. But these are not mutual sacrifices, they are unilateral concessions. She is not giving up anything. She is expanding her emotional territory while you shrink yours. And the most dangerous part, you start to believe this is your fault. That if you were more attentive, more mature, more present, more understanding, everything would be fine. You internalize her evaluation. Now she doesn't even need to criticize you, you do it yourself. You have become your own enforcer, monitoring every action of yours through her eyes. Here is the brutal truth you need to hear. You are not in a relationship, you are in a perpetual emotional audit. And no matter how many adjustments you make, the final report will never be approved. Because the goal is not for you to be approved. The goal is to keep you trying. And while you try, she feels powerful, desired, in control. Your constant effort to please her is proof that you value her. The day you stop trying is the day you are no longer useful to her. Not because she loves you and wants your effort, but because your effort feeds her narcissistic need for constant validation. Have you noticed that she never truly acknowledges your efforts? Or when she does, it's always accompanied by a remark about what is still missing. Thanks for making dinner, but you forgot to clean the sink. It was nice of you to pick me up, but you could have arrived 5 minutes earlier. Nothing you do is ever complete. There is always a flaw to be pointed out. This is not a demand for excellence. This is planned impossibility. Because if you can never fully get it right, you can never relax. And if you can never relax, you will always be in emotional debt to her. And debt is a tool of control. So you're here, reading this, and probably a part of you is resisting. But she's not a bad person. She just has high expectations. I really could do better. And that is exactly the resistance that keeps you trapped. Because admitting that you are in a toxic relationship means admitting that you lost time, that you deceived yourself, that you gave up important things for something that was never real. But here's what you need to understand. Recognizing toxicity is not admitting weakness, it is regaining clarity. And clarity is the first step to taking your life back. If you are identifying with what I'm saying here, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and like the video. And leave a comment saying which city or country you're watching from and whether you've been through something similar. Let's build a community of men who understand that dignity is not negotiable. Now let's talk about how this dynamic deepens and why you can't simply walk away from it. Because if it were as simple as realize it and leave, you would have already left. But it's not simple. And it's not because you're weak, it's because you're dealing with sophisticated psychological mechanisms that have been refined over months or years of conditioning. There is a specific pattern that narcissistic women use, and it is devastatingly effective: the moralization of personal preferences. She doesn't say, I prefer that you do X, she says, mature people do X. She doesn't say, I'd like you to be Y, she says, if you really loved me, you would be Y. Do you see the difference? In the first case, it's her preference. In the second, it's a moral failure on your part. When she turns preferences into matters of character, she's not just asking for changes, she's attacking your identity. And you can't negotiate identity. So you change. You mold yourself. You abandon parts of who you are not because you want to evolve, but because you want to stop being treated as morally inferior. And here is the cruelest trick: the more you change to meet her demands, the less she respects you. Because change motivated by fear does not generate attraction, it generates contempt. She asked you to change, you changed, and now you are the person who bends. And people who bend are not valued, they are used. You notice this when you realize that your concessions never generate reciprocity. You gave up going out with your friends? She didn't give up anything in return. You changed the way you communicate? She continues communicating the same way. You became more attentive? She became more demanding. The equation never balances because it was never designed to balance. This is where the concept of learned helplessness comes in. This is a psychological phenomenon where, after repeated failed attempts to change a situation, you stop trying. Not because you've accepted the situation, but because you've developed the deep belief that nothing you do will make a difference. And that belief paralyzes you. Have you tried talking to her about how you feel? Probably yes. And how did that go? She likely did one of three things: accused you of being dramatic, turned the conversation into a discussion about how you hurt her, or agreed superficially and changed absolutely nothing. All of these responses have the same objective: to invalidate your emotional experience. When you express discomfort and are treated as if you're exaggerating, you start to doubt your own perceptions. This is called emotional invalidation, and it's one of the most powerful tools of psychological control. Because if you can't trust your own emotions, you have to trust hers. And if you trust her perceptions of you, she controls you completely. Let's talk about punitive silence, because this is probably the mechanism that confuses you the most. She doesn't need to yell, doesn't need to insult you, doesn't need to attack you verbally. She simply freezes you out. She stops talking, stops looking at you, becomes emotionally inaccessible. And you panic. Why? Because her silence places you in an unbearable emotional vacuum. You don't know what you did, you don't know how to fix it, you don't know how long it will last. And that not knowing consumes you. So you do anything to break the silence. You apologize for things you didn't do, you take blame that isn't yours, you humiliate yourself just to regain emotional access to her. And when she finally forgives you and becomes warm again, the relief is so intense that you feel grateful. Grateful that she stopped punishing you. Do you see the inversion? You are thanking her for stopping something she never should have done in the first place. This is pure conditioning. Another destructive pattern is constant comparison. She doesn't criticize you directly, she just mentions how other men are. My friend's husband always remembers her birthday. My ex was very attentive about these things. I saw a couple on Instagram that travels every month. Each comparison is a clear message: you are not enough. And you start competing with idealized versions of other men. Versions that probably don't even exist the way she describes them. But you don't question it, you just try to be better. You try to prove that you are as good as her friend's husband, as romantic as her ex, as successful as the guy on Instagram. But here is the problem: you are not competing with real people, you are competing with fantasies. And fantasies don't have flaws, don't have bad days, don't have human limitations. So you will always lose that competition. Always. Now let's talk about something that probably confuses you: the good moments. Because they exist, right? She isn't cold all the time. Sometimes she is loving, affectionate, present. And these moments confuse you deeply because you think, see? She loves me. I just need to figure out how to make these moments last. But these moments are not evidence of genuine love, they are part of the control cycle. She needs to give you doses of affection to keep you engaged. If it were constant coldness, you would leave. If it were constant warmth, you would relax and stop trying so hard. So she alternates. And this alternation keeps you addicted, always chasing the next dose of her approval. This is called intermittent reinforcement, and it is the same mechanism that makes gambling addictive. You don't know when you'll win, so you keep playing. You don't know when she'll be loving, so you keep trying. And every time she gives you a bit of warmth after a period of coldness, the relief is so intense that it functions as a neurological reward. You are being conditioned in the same way as a laboratory rat. And this is not a dramatic metaphor, it is literally how your brain is being trained to respond. Alternating punishment and reward in unpredictable patterns create the strongest and hardest to break psychological bonds. While this is happening, you notice that you are losing important connections. Your friends stopped calling because you always cancel. Your family makes comments about how you've changed. Your hobbies have become distant memories. And you rationalize. This is how serious relationships work. You prioritize the person you love. But prioritizing does not mean erasing yourself. Prioritizing does not mean disappearing. Prioritizing does not mean abandoning everything that made you who you are. Healthy relationships expand your life, they don't shrink it. If you look around and realize that your life has become smaller since she entered it, that is not love, it is strategic isolation. And isolation makes you more dependent on her. Because without friends to give you external perspective, without hobbies to give you an independent identity, without personal spaces to remind you of who you are, she becomes your only source of validation. And when she is your only source of validation, she has absolute power over you. Have you noticed that you feel constantly anxious? That you compulsively check your phone waiting for messages from her? That you're afraid to make plans without consulting her first? That you rehearse conversations in your head before talking to her? That anxiety is not love, it is fear. Fear of disappointing her, fear of losing her, fear of not being enough. And here is the hardest truth: that anxiety will not go away by staying longer with her. It will not go away by proving more. It will not go away by loving more. Because the anxiety is not caused by something you are doing wrong, it is caused by the fact that you are in a relationship where being yourself is not enough. So you develop a second personality. The person you are when you're with her, and the person you really are. And the distance between these two versions of you grows every day. Until one day you look in the mirror and no longer recognize the person looking back at you. There is a specific moment when everything changes. It's not a dramatic explosion, it's a silent realization that hits you in the middle of a completely mundane situation. You're sitting on the couch, she's complaining about something you did, and suddenly you realize, no matter what I do, it will never be enough. And that realization doesn't free you immediately, it paralyzes you even more. Because now you consciously know what before you only felt. And knowing makes everything heavier. You can no longer pretend it's temporary, that she's just going through a difficult phase, that if you try a little harder things will get better. The truth is in front of you, clear and brutal: this is not going to change. But here's what happens at this stage: you don't leave. You stay. And you stay not because you still have hope, but because you've developed a distorted form of loyalty to suffering. You invested so much time, so much energy, so much of yourself into this relationship that leaving now feels like admitting that it was all a waste. So you continue, turning your staying into an act of moral resistance. You begin to rationalize your prison as virtue. I'm not like other men who abandon relationships when things get hard. True love requires sacrifice. She needs me, even if she doesn't show it. You turn your inability to leave into a heroic narrative of commitment. And that keeps you trapped more effectively than any physical chain ever could. At this point, something very dangerous happens. You stop trying to please her and start only trying to avoid conflict. The difference is subtle but fundamental. Before, you acted to gain her approval. Now, you act only to avoid losing peace. You're no longer seeking love, you're just managing damage. Your communication becomes strategic instead of authentic. You don't say what you think, you say what will create the least friction. You don't express what you feel, you calculate which emotion is allowed in that moment. You become a diplomat in your own relationship, always negotiating temporary truces instead of building real peace. And she notices this change. She notices that you've truly stopped trying. And do you know what happens? She intensifies the pressure. Because for her, your effort to please her was proof that you valued her. Now that you've stopped, she needs to force you back into trying. So the criticisms increase, the silence gets longer, the comparisons become more cruel. You thought that reducing your emotional investment would reduce conflict. But the opposite happens. Because the conflict was never about what you were doing wrong, it was about keeping you in a constant state of trying. And when you stop trying, the entire system needs to recalibrate with greater intensity to pull you back into the game. Here is something you need to understand deeply. She doesn't want you to be better, she wants you to keep trying to be better. The effort is the goal, not the result. Because while you are trying, you are devoted to her. And devotion is control. The day you actually improve to the point where you no longer need her, you become useless to her. So you are trapped in an impossible paradox. You can't win by trying, and you can't win by giving up. Any move you make is interpreted as failure. Trying is being desperate. Not trying is being negligent. Staying is being a doormat. Leaving is being selfish. There is no right action because the game was designed for you to lose. Let's talk about what happens to your self-esteem at this stage. It is completely destroyed. But in a peculiar way. You probably still function well at work, you're still competent in other areas of life, you can still maintain a facade of normality. But internally, you feel fundamentally inadequate. This inadequacy is specific. You feel inadequate as a partner, inadequate as a man, inadequate to be loved. And the cruelest part is that this inadequacy was carefully constructed by her over months or years of negative evaluation disguised as help. She convinced you that you have fundamental flaws that need to be fixed. And now you carry these beliefs as if they were objective truths. Have you noticed how you feel after spending time with her? Drained. Empty. Confused. As if you had run an emotional marathon without going anywhere. Because you spent hours trying to decipher what she really wants, trying to anticipate her reactions, trying to manage her mood. And in the end, you don't even have the energy to take care of yourself. This emotional exhaustion is not accidental, it is a direct consequence of living in a constant state of hypervigilance. You are always alert, always monitoring, always preparing for her next mood shift. Your nervous system never relaxes. And a nervous system that never relaxes eventually collapses. Perhaps the most painful aspect of this stage is the loneliness. You are in a relationship, technically you are never alone, but you feel deeply isolated. Because you can't be authentic with her without being judged. You can't be vulnerable without it being used against you later. You can't express needs without being treated as needy. So you develop a specific kind of loneliness that only exists inside relationships, the loneliness of being next to someone who makes you feel invisible. She is physically present but emotionally absent, except when she needs something from you or when she is evaluating you. You have become an object of utility rather than a human being with needs of your own. And here is the part that hurts the most. You know you need to leave, but you can't. Not because you truly love her at this point, but because leaving means facing several devastating truths at the same time. It means admitting that you wasted time. It means confronting the diminished version of yourself that you've become. It means rebuilding an identity you no longer even remember. So you remain paralyzed. Not happy, not hopeful, just paralyzed. Waiting for something to change externally because you can't gather the strength to change internally. Waiting for her to improve, waiting for yourself to improve, waiting for some external event that makes the decision to leave inevitable instead of optional. But waiting for change in a dynamic like this is like waiting for a predator to become vegetarian. It's not going to happen. Because for her, this dynamic works perfectly. She has control, constant validation through your effort to please her, and no real pressure to change because you stay anyway. The brutal truth is this: you have become complicit in your own destruction. Not because you want to, but because you were conditioned to believe that this destruction is love, that this suffering is commitment, that this prison is loyalty. And as long as you believe that, nothing will change. So how do you get out of this? The answer is not romantic, it's not dramatic, it's not a cathartic conversation where everything gets resolved. The way out is a cold, rational, and deeply painful decision. You accept that some relationships cannot be saved because they were not built to work, they were built to consume you. The first thing you need to understand is that you cannot fix this dynamic by trying harder. You can't fix it by being better. You can't fix it by communicating more clearly. You can't fix it by loving more intensely. Because the problem was never your insufficiency, it was her need to keep you insufficient. Here is the truth no one wants to hear. Narcissistic women do not change because you changed. They do not respect you more because you sacrificed more. They do not value you more because you proved your worth. In fact, the exact opposite happens. The more you prove, the less you are worth. Because proving means you need her approval. And people who need are not desired, they are tolerated. So the solution is not to play the game better, it is to stop playing. And stopping the game does not mean being aggressive, it does not mean revenge, it does not mean creating drama. It simply means refusing to participate in a dynamic where you always lose. It means setting real boundaries and being willing to lose the relationship in order to keep those boundaries. Here are the absolute signs that you are in this situation. You constantly feel evaluated. Your attempts to please generate more demands instead of gratitude. You abandoned important parts of yourself to avoid conflict. You are afraid to express needs. She uses silence as punishment. Your achievements are minimized while your mistakes are eternalized. You feel anxious more than happy. She constantly compares you to other men. You lost connection with friends and hobbies. You rationalize behaviors from her that you would never accept from other people. If you recognize 3 or more of these signs, you are not in a challenging relationship, you are in a destructive relationship. And destructive relationships do not improve with time, they only normalize destruction until you can no longer recognize what is healthy. Recovery begins with a simple but terrifying decision. You choose your dignity over the relationship. Not because you are selfish, but because dignity is not negotiable. You do not negotiate attraction by sacrificing identity. You do not buy love through self-destruction. You do not build intimacy through subordination. And here is something crucial. When you finally set real boundaries, she will test those boundaries immediately. She will intensify the behavior that always worked before. She will alternate between anger and coldness, between accusations and victimhood. She will make you feel guilty for finally defending yourself. And if you give in at that moment, you will have taught her that your boundaries are just empty threats. So you need to be prepared for the final consequence. She may leave you. And you need to be at peace with that. Because if you are only willing to set boundaries that she accepts, you are not setting boundaries, you are negotiating the terms of your own prison. Many men at this point ask, but what if she changes? What if I leave and later discover that she was willing to improve? Here is the honest answer. If she were genuinely willing to change, she would have already changed when you expressed discomfort the first, second, or 10th time. Real change does not require you to reach a breaking point. Real change happens when someone realizes they are hurting the person they love and chooses to stop immediately. What she offers when you threaten to leave is not real change, it is tactical negotiation. She will promise to improve, she will have a few days or weeks of different behavior, and then she will gradually return to the previous pattern. Because her behavior is not a bad habit that needs to be corrected, it is a functional strategy of control that she has no interest in abandoning. Here is the most important moral lesson. Relationships are not prisons that you have to serve a sentence in until the end. You do not owe loyalty to situations that destroy you. Commitment does not mean accepting abuse disguised as love. Maturity is not enduring everything in silence. It is knowing how to recognize when something is unhealthy and having the courage to leave. And when you finally leave, 3 things will happen. First, you will feel immediate relief followed by deep panic. Because you are leaving not just a relationship, but an identity you built around trying to please her. Second, you will constantly doubt your decision in the first few months. You will remember the good moments and temporarily forget the bad ones. Third, you will begin to recognize yourself again. This reconnection with yourself is not instant. You spent months or years shaping yourself around her expectations. It will take time to discover what you really want when you are not calculating her reaction. It will take time to trust your own perceptions again. It will take time to feel comfortable being yourself without fear of constant judgment. But it happens. Gradually, you notice that you are no longer compulsively checking your phone. You accept invitations from friends without calculating whether it will cause conflict. You return to hobbies not because they impress someone, but because you genuinely enjoy them. You stop rehearsing conversations in your head. You relax. And when you relax, when you finally feel peace instead of constant anxiety, you realize how unhealthy that relationship truly was. You realize that you confused intensity with intimacy, control with care, subordination with love. The final truth is this: you deserve a relationship where being yourself is enough. Where your efforts to improve are recognized instead of minimized. Where your mistakes are forgiven instead of filed away as evidence against you. Where vulnerability creates closeness instead of being used as a weapon. Where you feel more whole, not less. And if the relationship you are in now makes you feel constantly inadequate, constantly evaluated, constantly in debt, you are not with the wrong person at a bad time. You are in a fundamentally broken dynamic that cannot be fixed, only abandoned. So this is the real choice. Do you continue trying to prove your worth to someone who needs you to feel worthless, or do you reclaim your dignity and accept that some people are not compatible with healthy relationships? The answer should be obvious, but for those inside it, it rarely is. If this video helped you in any way, subscribe to the channel, like it, and share it with someone who needs to hear this. And leave a comment saying where you are watching from and whether you finally had the courage to reclaim your life. Your dignity is not negotiable.